I never thought I'd find myself sitting at the edge of my childhood bed, rehearsing a conversation I was too afraid to start. The walls around me still held the silence of tradition, the kind that wraps itself so tightly around a family that no one dares to speak against it. I'm 28, unmarried, financially independent, and living in the city now. But here, in this house in our small town, I still feel like the obedient daughter who was taught to ask for nothing. My father built everything we have from the ground up. He came from nothing. His childhood was one of bare feet and borrowed books. Over the years, he became a respected businessman, a man whose word carried weight in our community. People admire him for his discipline, his work ethic, his silence. Especially his silence. Growing up, I often found myself watching him more than speaking to him. He wasn't cruel, just distant. Like he loved us in ways we weren't allowed to see. In our house, there were rules you didn't question and topics you didn't raise. The inheritance was one of them. It was always understood that the property, our home, the land, the small rental units, would go to my brother. Not because anyone said it outright, but because that's how it's always been done. Daughters marry. Sons inherit. That was the rhythm of life here. But lately that rhythm has started to feel wrong. I've worked hard to build a life for myself in the city, but it hasn't been easy. I dream of owning my own apartment, of standing on ground that I can say is mine. And every time I think about my father's property, a quiet question creeps in. Why not me? Still, asking him feels like standing on the edge of something sacred, something fragile. What if he sees it as greed? What if it's a betrayal? I've run the scene in my head 100 times. His face tightening, his voice cold, the quiet hurt in his eyes. I can't tell if I'm more afraid of his refusal or of how I'll feel if he agrees. I don't know how to ask. But I do know I'm tired of pretending I don't want to. When I was a child, I never questioned the way things were. My brother and I were raised under the same roof, ate at the same table, wore the same school uniform. But somewhere between our shared crayons and separate bedrooms, the differences began to take root. I remember one summer afternoon when I was about 8. My brother Arjun was 10, and the electricity had gone out for the 3rd time that day. My father stood in the courtyard, shirt half-buttoned, sweat beading on his forehead, working on the old generator. I ran out barefoot, eager to help. He glanced at me briefly, then pointed to the switchboard. "Fetch Arjun," he said. "I need someone to hold the wire." "I can do it," I offered, already moving toward him. He didn't even pause. "No, beta. Go inside. This isn't for you." It wasn't cruel. His tone was even, almost gentle. But it stayed with me. Not because I wanted to hold the wire, but because in that moment, I understood something for the first time. Some things were simply not meant for me. That quiet sorting continued as we grew. Arjun was taken along to bank meetings and land inspections. I was taken shopping for saris and told to help Ma in the kitchen. My achievements were praised, yes, but with a different tone. "You'll make a fine wife one day," relatives would say when I brought home good grades. So smart, so cultured. Everything I did seemed to be in preparation for a life I hadn't even chosen. And yet I was loved. That's what made it so complicated. My father never raised his voice at me. He bought me my first bicycle, sat silently in the back of the school auditorium during my speeches, and always left a note in my lunchbox when I returned to the hostel. But love, I realized, wasn't always enough. Not when it came wrapped in expectations that quietly told me who I could be, and who I couldn't. One memory stands out clearer than the rest. I must have been 13. My father was filling out forms to transfer some agricultural land into Arjun's name. Just as a formality, he said. I hovered nearby, curious. "What's this for?" I asked. "Future," he replied without looking up. "For Arjun. He'll need it." I don't remember what I said after that. Probably nothing. I just remember staring at the paperwork and wondering why my future had never required any land. As I got older, I started noticing things that once escaped me. How male cousins were asked about their career plans, while girls were asked about their wedding dates. How property was passed from father to son like a whispered tradition, never questioned, never explained. I noticed the pride in my father's voice when he introduced Arjun as the one who will carry things forward, and the affectionate dismissal in his smile when he introduced me as our little girl, visiting from the city. That smile used to make me feel special. Now it made me feel small. The older I got, the more aware I became of the unspoken contract women were born into. Be good, don't ask for too much, and eventually leave. Love is given, even celebrated, but legacy, that's reserved. And that's why my question is so difficult. I'm not just asking for my share of property. I'm asking to rewrite an entire script that was handed to me before I even knew how to read it. It started with a flat I couldn't afford. A small, sunlit one-bedroom in the outskirts of Pune. Nothing extravagant, but close to my office, with just enough warmth to feel like mine. I had been saving for over 5 years. Every bonus, every freelance project, every birthday envelope tucked away for someday. But even with a loan, I was falling short. Property prices had leapt ahead while I'd been cautiously moving one paycheck at a time. I remember staring at the price breakdown on the builder's brochure, my fingers cold despite the humid August air. I had always prided myself on being independent. I'd never asked for anything, not from my parents, not from anyone. But in that moment, sitting alone in my rented flat with paint peeling near the bathroom ceiling, a strange thought formed. I have family property. Why should I struggle like this when part of what my father built could help me stand taller? Of course, the idea didn't take root right away. It hovered, unsure of itself, like a child knocking softly on a door it wasn't sure it should open. Then, something unexpected happened. At a family wedding last month, I overheard 2 aunties whispering about my second cousin Meera. She had moved to Bangalore and opened her own boutique. She got a decent start, one of them said. Her father gave her a plot from their old property. Brave girl, asked for it directly. I paused mid-sip of juice, pretending not to listen, but my heart thudded. Meera. She was always quiet, always the one sitting on the edge of group photos. And she asked. And received. Stayed with me all week. I texted her casually. Hey, heard you're doing great. She replied warmly, even invited me to visit. I didn't bring up the property. I didn't know how. But just knowing someone else had broken the silence made the idea feel less impossible. Still, nothing pushed me harder than Arjun's voice a few days later. We were on a call, coordinating something for Diwali. I made a joking comment about him inheriting Dad's kingdom, and he laughed. Obviously, he said, light-hearted but firm. You'll get the gold, maybe some jewelry. That's the tradition, right? There was no malice. He said it the way someone states a weather report. As if it were fact. As if I would never even think to question it. I didn't respond. Just let the silence fill the space until we hung up. But inside me something shifted. Something clenched. Why not me? Why was it bold for Meera, expected for Arjun, and unthinkable for me? I thought about how my father had supported my education, paid for my master's degree, even encouraged me to take that internship in Mumbai when everyone else told me to stay close to home. He had given me so much, but always as a gesture of love, not as recognition of my right. And this, asking for a formal share, would be crossing a line. Not emotional, legal, binding, real. Would he see it as greed, as betrayal? Would Ma cry silently in the kitchen, hurt by my audacity? Would Arjun roll his eyes and say, I knew it? These thoughts swirled through my head, choking the resolve I was trying to build. Every time I considered bringing it up, I imagined myself being cut down with a single look. Not shouted at, but worse, dismissed. And yet, despite the fear, the question kept growing louder. Why not me? I started talking to my father in my head. At night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning in slow, tired circles, I'd play out the conversation. Baba, I wanted to talk to you about something. His face would lift from the newspaper, unreadable. I've been thinking. About your property. I mean our property. And then I'd freeze. Every time. Sometimes he'd interrupt me with a sharp look. Other times he'd just go silent, and the silence would feel heavier than anger. In one version he laughed. In another, he simply stood up and left the room. I hated those imaginary conversations, but I couldn't stop having them. They were rehearsals I never quite completed. One evening, after another failed attempt at working up the courage, I called my friend Rima. She'd known me since college, one of the few people who never shrank away from difficult conversations. "You should ask," she said plainly after I poured out everything. "It's not that easy," I said. "It's not just money. It's his pride, his history, our culture." "Your culture isn't law," she said. "It's expectation dressed up as respect." I didn't know whether to be grateful or offended. "It would break his heart," I murmured. "Would it?" she asked. "Or would it just challenge his idea of what daughters are allowed to want?" I didn't reply, because part of me knew she was right. A few days later I tried to bring it up. I was sitting with Baba in the veranda. The monsoon clouds were gathering, and the scent of wet earth drifted in through the open grills. He was drinking tea, the newspaper folded on his lap. I watched him for a while. His thick, weathered hands, the slowness of his movements, the lines around his eyes that had deepened with time. "Baba," I said cautiously, "do you ever think about what will happen to everything once you're not around?" He gave a small grunt, non-committal. "That's for later. Right now I'm still here." I hesitated. "It's just that. Sometimes I wonder if things could be divided more fairly." He looked at me then. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just curious and a little tired. "Why are you thinking about all that now?" "Panic. No reason. Just being practical." And that was it. I let it drop cowardly and quick. The door had been open for a breath, and I'd shut it myself. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing a letter. "Dear Baba, there's something I've been meaning to say but haven't had the courage to bring up directly. It's about your property. I know how much it means to you, what it cost you to build all of this piece by piece. I respect that more than I can express. But I also want to talk about my place in it. Not just as your daughter, but as someone who has tried to walk the path you taught me, of hard work, honesty, and self-respect. I'm not asking because I feel entitled. I'm asking because I feel forgotten. I want to be part of this legacy too. Love, Ananya." I folded the paper neatly, slid it into an envelope, and placed it inside my drawer. Still there. Some nights I open it, read it again, wondering if it says too much or not enough. The truth is, this isn't just about legal shares or square footage. It's about recognition. About standing on ground I helped water, even if no one saw it. About saying that I am not just a daughter you love. I am also a person with a future worth investing in. But generations of silence press down on my shoulders like inherited weight. In our family, respect is shown by obedience, and daughters prove their love by not asking for too much. Still, something inside me, steady and stubborn, is rising. The silence that once felt sacred now feels suffocating. And I'm starting to believe that breaking it might not be betrayal at all. It might be the first honest thing I've ever done. It was a Thursday evening. The sky outside was the color of overripe plums, and the first signs of dusk had begun to settle on the house like soft dust. I had come home for the weekend, citing a fabricated dental appointment and some vague office fatigue. But the real reason lay folded in my handbag, my courage still crumpled and unsure but finally with me. Ma was in the kitchen rolling out chapatis. I offered to help, hoping she'd ask me to sit instead, which she did. My father was in the living room, reclining in his wooden chair by the window, TV on low volume. His reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead as he scrolled through news on his phone. I stood by the doorway for a long minute, my feet half frozen, my mind rehearsing the same lines it had for months. My heart thudded, an irregular, almost panicked rhythm, and my throat felt dry despite the glass of water I had gulped moments earlier. Now or never. I walked in. "Baba." He looked up, just slightly, eyes peering over the rim of his glasses. Hmm. I wanted to talk about something. Something important. He set the phone down, not fully, just enough to make it clear I had his attention, but not all of it. That familiar restraint. Always present. Always quiet. Speak, he said, not unkindly. I took a breath that felt like it scraped the inside of my chest. I've been thinking a lot lately. About the house. The land. The shops. Everything you've built. He said nothing, but his brow furrowed slightly. I know, I rushed. I know you've worked hard for all of it. And I'm proud of you. We all are. I wanted to ask if you've thought about giving me a share too. He looked at me then, really looked. His full attention now present, heavy and still. I continued, my voice wobbling. Not because I want to take anything away from Arjun. Not because I'm struggling or desperate. I'm managing fine, Baba. But it's about fairness. I've always tried to do what's right. I studied hard, I made a life on my own, I never asked for anything. But I am still your child. I'm still part of this family. And I want to be part of its future too. He blinked. Once. I swallowed. It's not just about the land. It's about what it means. It's about feeling like I belong. Not just emotionally but tangibly. Legally. Equally. The silence that followed felt louder than any raised voice. He didn't move. Didn't shift. His eyes were unreadable, and his hands rested still on the armrests of his chair. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, if he was angry or hurt or simply stunned. I'm not saying you have to decide now, I added quickly, trying to soften the moment. I just had to say it. Finally. Still nothing. The room held its breath. Outside, the call to prayer echoed faintly from a nearby mosque. Ma called out from the kitchen. Dinner in 10 minutes. He turned his head slightly at the sound, then looked back at me. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. Then he nodded. Just once. A slow, quiet nod. Not agreement, not denial. Just acknowledgement. And then, without a word, he picked up his phone again. I stood there, unsure what to feel. Was that nod a yes? A no? Was it simply a father stunned by the weight of a daughter's voice he never expected to hear in this context? I walked out of the room on trembling legs, every nerve in my body electric and confused. In the kitchen, Ma smiled and handed me a bowl of dal, oblivious to the small revolution that had just taken place 2 rooms away. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in my life I had asked. And he had heard me. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Not in the literal sense. My office buzzed with deadlines, notifications kept my phone lit up, and the city traffic still screamed through the windows. But inside me there was a different kind of silence. A waiting silence. One that curled around my ribs like a question unanswered. I left home the morning after I'd spoken to Baba. He hadn't said anything more. Not during dinner, not during breakfast. Not even when I touched his feet as I always did before leaving. He looked at me with a gaze that was neither warm nor cold, just unreadable. As if he was still processing the shape of the words I'd spoken the night before. That silence traveled back with me to Pune. Ma called on Sunday evening. She asked if I'd eaten, if the weather was still humid, if my toothache had settled down. She didn't mention the conversation with Baba. I waited, listening for even the faintest hesitation in her voice, but there was none. It was like it hadn't happened. Monday morning Arjun messaged. Heard you're making power moves now. Always knew you were ambitious, face with tears of joy. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. It wasn't cruel, not exactly, but laced with something bitter. Sarcasm dressed up as sibling banter. The kind that stings because it hides behind a smile. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the guilt rise in waves. Had I broken something sacred? Had I crossed an invisible line that daughters weren't supposed to even approach? For years, I had taken pride in being the good one, the easy child, the one who didn't fight, didn't demand, didn't question. Now I was the one who did. And still, Underneath the guilt, a quieter feeling stirred. Not defiance. Not even hope. Something steadier than both. Pride. A memory surfaced. One I hadn't thought of in years. My first job interview. I was 21, fresh out of grad school, too nervous to eat that morning. I had worn my best kurta, ironed it twice, practiced my introduction in the mirror until my voice cracked. The HR manager had looked at me flatly, unimpressed. My answers were rehearsed, too formal. I could feel the interview slipping away. Then toward the end she asked, "Why do you want this job?" And I dropped the script. I just spoke. "Because I want to stop asking my parents for money," I said. "Because I want to earn something that's mine." She smiled. Got the job. That memory, small, insignificant to anyone else, felt monumental now. I had survived that moment of courage. I had felt this exact weight before. Fear, uncertainty, the ache of doing something no one expected me to do. And I had come out the other side. Maybe this would be the same. Maybe Baba was just quiet because he didn't know what to say. Maybe Ma stayed silent because she didn't want to take sides. Maybe Arjun's sarcasm was just his discomfort, dressed up in a joke. Or maybe none of that mattered. Maybe, for the first time, it was enough that I had spoken. I didn't regret asking. Not truly. Not anymore. Even if nothing changed, something already had. 3 weeks later he called. It was a short call. He didn't ask how I was or make small talk. Just said, "If you're free this weekend, come home. I have something for you." His voice was calm, unreadable as always. But something in the way he said it made my breath catch. I went. The house looked the same, but I didn't feel the same walking into it. Ma smiled at me a little too knowingly and told me Baba was in his study. "He's waiting." I knocked gently, then stepped inside. He was sitting at his desk, the same place I'd seen him review accounts, sign documents, manage a world I was never invited into. He didn't look up right away, just gestured to the chair across from him. Then he slid a plain brown folder across the table toward me. I opened it with shaky fingers. Legal papers. Name. Percentage. My share. I couldn't speak. "I've spoken to the lawyer," he said. "It'll take some time to process formally. There's a procedure." I nodded, still not trusting my voice. He leaned back slightly in his chair. His expression didn't soften, but his voice did. "I may not agree with what you did," he said quietly. "But I understand why you did it." I blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. Not because I'd won something. Not because I now owned a piece of land. But because, for the first time, he saw me. Not as a daughter to be loved from a distance, but as someone who could take up space, ask questions, be heard. I wiped my eyes quickly, not wanting to ruin the moment with too much emotion. He didn't reach out. That was never his way. But he didn't look away either. And that was enough. I stood, clutching the folder to my chest. "Thank you, Baba." He nodded. "You always were stubborn." Smiled. "You raised me." That made the corner of his mouth twitch. Almost a smile. As I left the room, I felt something unfamiliar settle inside me. Not triumph. Not relief. Something quieter. Recognition. It's been 4 months since that day in Baba's study. The paperwork is still in process, and I've yet to do anything practical with the share I received. But something far more permanent shifted inside me. I used to think this was about money, about property, about proving a point. It wasn't. It was about being seen. I wasn't just asking for land. I was asking for place, for acknowledgement, for the right to belong not only in the family photos or on the festival calls, but in the foundation of what this family has built. I was asking to stop being temporary, to stop being the good daughter who quietly exits stage left when the time comes. And I was heard. Baba and I don't talk about it. He still doesn't ask about my work, and I don't press him for warmth he doesn't know how to give. But something's changed in the way he looks at me. There's a quiet respect there now, even if it's unspoken. Even if it's just a pause before he answers my questions, or the way he listens a second longer before responding. Ma still cooks my favorite food when I visit. Arjun and I haven't discussed it since that message. Maybe we never will. Maybe that's okay. What matters most is that I no longer feel like I have to shrink myself to keep the peace. Can want things. Can ask for them. And I can survive the silence that follows. I walk differently now. Stand straighter. Not because I've claimed a piece of land, but because I've claimed my voice. The one I buried under politeness, under tradition, under fear. The apartment I wanted. I'm still looking. But I know I'll find it. And when I do, I'll step inside as someone who asked for what she deserved, and didn't apologize for it. Because the truth is, I was hesitant the first time I asked. But now, I'll never be afraid to ask for what I deserve.